Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Monster Hunter Wilds talk. In the post-Gamescom information world we now live in, we're now waiting for the next events for new information. If you're unaware, we have one soon, later this month, set in Japan, but then two more later in late October for Gamescom Asia and another event in Paris right after that. So we're hoping for new information at those events, but in the meantime, people have been discussing what we have seen. And naturally, there's a lot of hype and excitement, but with that, of course, valid, and then as well, less valid concerns. Since I've actually played the game and talked with other press and creators who have, I wanted to talk about these topics and whether I think they're fair concerns or not, alleviate some, maybe talk about some that are fair, highlighting each problem in turn and see what you guys think. So with that explained, let's just begin. Starting with what I think is one of the biggest, most valid concerns overall, and that's to do with the weapon changes. For example, something simple and quality of life is giving a weapon a new feature that just makes their gameplay smoother and more enjoyable. So in the case of various weapons, their big smash hit special attacks now have a follow-up. So with the longsword, we have the Helm Breaker, and that now has a new follow-up attack, which unleashes this barrage of strikes that looks incredible and actually does even more damage than the helm itself. We now have something similar with, say, Switch Axe, where you're doing a zero-sum discharge, and now you can do this horizontal spin explosion after that. Just a cool little addition to make one of the strongest things even better. However, what is maybe too easy or too much quality life that people are complaining about or concerned about is when they take something that there's risk versus reward in it and then removing the risk completely. The key example of that everyone's been talking about is longsword again with the Helmbreaker, where it has been shown to be able to be cancelled. So you jump up into the air and then you can just sheath the sword before landing it, allowing you to immediately go for another and, try again. Why would you ever do this? Well, it just comes down to the aim was bad, the timing was bad, the monster randomly moved away or went for another target. Basically, it looks like you're going to miss it, so let's just cancel that and then try again. I understand the reasoning behind stuff like this. It's the idea of it never feeling good when those things happen and you just miss, completely whiffing, losing a load of DPS. And now you have to build back up to then even attempt again. Allowing you to cancel it means that you've assessed the situation and cancelled before it goes off. But then we're completely removing the risk versus reward generally, because if it even looks remotely like you're going to miss, you can just cancel and cool. And if you timed that spend wrong, well then that's on you. There should be a risk, right? Because then the reward feels even better because, hey, not only did you hit it, but let's say you hit on the optimal spot, the weak point like the head or whatever, you cut off the tail. Those moments feel even better because, there was risk. You could have missed, but you didn't. Overly forgiving mechanics like that, I think, is one of the more fair and valid concerns that we have for some of the weapon changes we're seeing in Wilds. And that's not the only one. Take the bow and its new perfect evade called Discerning Dodge. What we've seen with this is it basically means when you evade, you do your dodge evade as a bow, you're getting this new special evade animation. What it does is it gives you one whole notch on your new bar, the trick shot gauge, but it also restores stamina, which is the thing that everyone's more worried about. It's restoring a massive amount of stamina, easily half of a stamina bar for evading at the right time. This is pretty crazy because we have a direct one-for-one comparison when we look at my main weapon, Dual Blades. We have a new mechanic in Wilds called Demon Dodge. Right as you're about to be hit, if you're in demon mode or archdemon mode, if you evade right as you're about to be hit, you'll trigger your perfect evade called Demon Dodge. Now you'll be glowing blue and you have this buff for like 12 seconds. During that time, your evades now deal damage and you can do a new follow-up to do an extra corkscrew spin. Pretty cool, but not with the same level of iframes as Discerning Dodge. And none of this is restoring stamina. I can only imagine how busted it would be if I could perfect evade with my Dual Blades and get stamina back. I could essentially never lose demon mode. That would be kind of busted. And that's essentially what the bow has. Every evade that they do, they can perfect evade and get a load of stamina back. And after talking with the Arix team, it seems like there's like perfect evades or slightly wrong, but it still triggers the Discerning Dodge, leading to different amounts of stamina given back. If they rebalance this to be maybe less forgiving or maybe not give you a full stamina bar, but less when you do it, maybe that'd be a way to balance it. Or is this even a problem? Is it not just fine to let bows have loads of stamina and the best players that are always hitting these evades are rewarded? That's sounds really fun, and there is a lot of skill in landing consistent perfect evades. It's not like it just gets given to you, but it's undeniable that a high level of play, bow is looking kind of insane just based on the Discerning Dodge. But these are the big questions of like, how is the meta gonna evolve and ultimately establish itself for each weapon? What's going to be the primary gameplay loop? These are concerns, but not necessarily what we'll end up with at the full launch of the game. Or maybe, they'll balance things in a way where it all makes sense. Now, for another very valid concern, people are wondering about running a hunting horn as their secondary no matter what you're playing. The idea is that let's say you're playing greatsword, you want to hit as hard as you can, so you pull out your backup hunting horn from the seikret, you equip it, you do a couple of dance buffs, play out some songs, then you swap back to your greatsword, and then those buffs actually maintain, as we've seen and shown from some of the gameplay from the different press sessions. So it does kind of sound optimal to have those buffs available and going whatever weapon you're using. We are wondering if they're going to see that and go, maybe we don't want everyone using a hunting horn as their secondary for buff purposes. So maybe they'll prevent the buffs from lasting when you swap or do something of that nature. I think that's another valid concern because it would be lame if having two weapons devolved into meaning you have your main weapon and then you have your hunting horn for buffing. I do think a lot of the feedback they're going to get after the possible demo, if that does happen, that'll really highlight that before launch. Next for concerns, people were talking about counters being too much again. As we come off the back of Rise and specifically Sunbreak, where nearly everyone had like a really reliable counter that they pretty much spam every attack. They've obviously gone into Wilds and changed the weapons at a core level in many ways, where they've cut counters off most weapons. And then they've introduced the new offset attacks for those that, actually benefited from them a lot. For example, one of my favorite weapons in Sunbreak was easily the switch axe, and that had this incredible counter that you throw out, time at specific levels, get a big charged hit off, and it just felt great to do. Meanwhile, for dual blades, I felt that my counter was just kind of busted. I just ignore whatever the monster's doing max DPS wherever's right, and not play around positioning or anything. And the moment the monster's about to punish me for my really brain-off gameplay, I just throw out my counter, which had really long frames to actually trigger successfully. I'd deal damage, I'd iframe through, land somewhere, and keep going. And being able to stack up the wire bugs means I'd be able to do that multiple times, no problem. It definitely resulted in a very brain-off, easy playstyle for dual blades, at least in my opinion, and that obviously applied to a lot of weapons. But on the other hand, like with Switch Axe, it introduced a core gameplay change where you're not having to rely on evade extender, you can just be the wall and counter whenever you need to. But because the timing was pretty, tough, it was very rewarding, but again, high risk. Introducing the offset attacks then was quite a clever way to address that. Those that get a lot out of that, greatsword, switch axe, and so on, they have this new attack that they can send out and collide with the actual monster attack at the right time to counter what they're doing. Definitely harder and less reliable than just straight counters, but a clever way to introduce that mechanic to the weapons that, it felt good on. So I think that's a concern that's been very much alleviated. A lot of weapons have lost counters, and the ones that benefited from it and actually, happy with those counters, got a new version of one. Next for concerns, I want to talk about the Horde mechanic and, the alpha or grouped enemies. The only grouped enemy that we had in the recording session we were able to show you was doshaguma. This is where you have alpha monsters, like a herd of enemies, and there's one big one that's distinguished by different hair and colors. This mechanic kind of means you need to use the new lure pods to force the alpha to follow you to a new location. Or you could use the large dung pods to send them all flying and just go wherever the big one goes. Undeniably, this is a cool mechanic for making it feel like a real living world, but at the same time, I can believe, having done it myself, that it is kind of annoying, or inconvenience at least, to find a herd of enemies and then you have to go, well, I've got a lure or I've got a dung pod, take this to a new location, then I can fight every time. In my experience fighting the herd of doshaguma, the non-alpha ones really get in the way. They move intentionally like a wolf pack, blocking your line of sight at key moments, seemingly intentionally. It's a really cool mechanic, but if I'm thinking about doing something many times and farming it, I could see that being annoying. But we have multiple pod options to deal with this, and maybe as we progress the game, we'll have more options. We'll see. On the other hand, there's the Horde mechanic where there's absolutely tons of one monster type. We saw this in one of the trailers where we're running through a storm. And personally, I experienced a story mission where there was cinematics and a Horde that I couldn't record or really show. But I will say from that experience, the Horde felt very intentionally done rather than a normal thing happening in a normal hunt. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. It felt more story related. But of course, that's based on literally one encounter with it. So do take that with a heavy grain of salt. So for me, me, I think those are the more valid, real concerns. Then we have the UI and convenience stuff. The most obvious one is the squiggly bar, your health bar, that like dances around when a big attack is coming your way. It can be distracting to some, I'm sure, but having played the game and even fought Raidao where that squiggly bar must have been going, I just didn't notice it. The idea is it's meant to warn you that a big attack's coming and you really need to pay attention right now. That's a useful thing, but I don't know, I'm just not focused on it. But on the other side of things, I completely understand how it'd be distracting. It forces you to look away from the fight and monster. You know, I'm sure people who have different attention spans will be really bothered by it. And I imagine after all the feedback they've had, there will be considerations on toning it down or giving a setting to mess with it. I checked the settings while I was in game and didn't find anything specific to tone it down. But you know, the same thing happened after Rise's demo with our hunters screaming, "Whoa, watch out," every 4 seconds, you know, when a monster's going to do attack, especially in multiplayer hunts. So after the demo, we were then given a new option to turn down the rate at which our hunter does that based on the feedback. So I expect the same kind of quality management for the health squiggly mechanic. And if we do get a demo for Wilds, which you know we expect and hope for, then yeah, feedback will come and we'll probably get a setting like that if we don't already have one when the demo drops. Next was a concern brought up by Rurikun when I was talking to him about this stuff. He highlighted how it's a bit easy where you can just kind of hop on the seikret and sharpen or even heal mid-hunt. You're in the middle of a fight and you just hop on this mount and then just circle around healing and it can't keep track of you and you can evade while doing that. The downside of healing is normally you're really slow, you're vulnerable, so you need to time it correctly. And then obviously sharpening, you're held in place. By just hopping on your palamute, I mean your seikret, you can just evade that mechanic completely. And that's intentionally said by me because you could do the same thing on palamute, nothing's changed since Rise. However, it's still a valid concern by Ruri and others that, yeah, it's kind of easy mode healing and super safe and takes some of the threat away. But after that concern was brought up in general, I saw this great Reddit post about how, I mean, we were doing the same thing in the old games. You would just zone transfer, take a loading screen to a new place where the monster isn't, instantly exit the fight, and then sharpen and heal and return to the fight. It was the same thing, you just did it in a different way. At least when you're riding on the back of a mount, you're still there in the action. You're still able to provide information to people you're playing multiplayer with, or see what's going on. You still have that little bit of skill where you're moving the mount to avoid attacks. It's actually much less invasive than the old method. But, you know, when you look at World, you couldn't do either of these things, and compared to that, it definitely is easier. So what do you guys think? Now, one other thing I've not seen concerns for, but I want to highlight because it does fit, is the whole barrel bombs and placing traps in the wrong place. This is a tale as old as time. We've all done it. We've all placed something wrong or too early or even accidentally pressed the button. And now we've wasted a barrel bomb or even a trap. Well, in Wilds, you can just pick up the bomb and put it back in the inventory and then place it again when you're ready. Same thing appears to be the case for traps. And that is a real big quality of life that I personally love, but it undeniably lowers the payment, the risk of using these things. Other quality of life exists too, like when you try to use a potion. Let's say you go to use a mega potion and you could have got the same heal value from a regular potion. There's a setting that's now active that forces you to drink the right potion, meaning if you're going to waste healing on a mega potion, it'll just automatically use a regular potion. Lots of people are talking about this kind of stuff, like, is it not babying the game too much? Personally, I just don't think it matters. It's basically just preventing you from having to press one more button to swap to the right potion. And if it means we get to focus on the fight, the hunt, and the actual gameplay more, I just see that as a good thing. Two last things to mention though would be the armor unlocking. There is no like gendered armor anymore, so everyone can wear everything. This is fantastic. I think any actual Monster Hunter player is thrilled by this, and it's usually just the grifters that are just weird and finding stuff to whine about in games they don't even play that are worried about this stuff. Personally, I messed about with this in the tent when I had my play session and just found it really cool. I created new armor sets, new outfits from it, and with the armor sets having skills on them and part of like multiple set skills, wearing the right stuff that fits together gets you bonuses too. But because we can do the different non-gendered versions of armor, you can still create something that looks good while also benefiting from those passives. Overall, massive win. Unlike microtransactions, which everyone is still complaining or worried about, I don't like them. And they're doing it too much in Capcom games especially, and we know that, we see it in every Capcom release. In Monster Hunter Wilds, we expect this to be one of the biggest, if not their biggest release of a game ever, and so of course they're going to want to profit off it as much as possible. In Rise, we saw them introduce new features like buying layered weapons, and they added some really cool stuff that of course you can only get by buying it. This stuff sucks. There's no doubt that I dislike this, and I think any reasonable person doesn't like it. And they're putting development time into it. Of course they are, because it makes money. But at the same time, I don't think any amount of dislike from the community is going to change it. If it successfully makes them money and it's worth their dev time, they're going to keep doing it. All we can really do is prevent them from crossing the line with pay-to-win mechanics and never allow that. The other big concerns that I've seen for the game come down to usual stuff like, please no more boring world weapon designs, which I think, to be fair, they've learned from already quite some time ago. We didn't see anything like it in Rise. In fact, the Rise weapon designs were really fun and cool. And the other thing was to make multiplayer playthroughs better, like, group cinematic watching. I think they've confirmed quite a lot from multiplayer improvements, so we'll see when we get to test those, but I expect a lot of improvements there too. So just let me know, are there any other concerns you're wondering about that we didn't talk about today? Either way, we'll be covering more Wilds topics and news as it does come. But until then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.